Okay, welcome AP World History students to what is actually your Chapter 14, the expansive realm of Islam. And we're going to talk about basically Muhammad, the founder of Islam, its rapid expansion throughout the Middle Eastern world, and its two dynasties, the Umayyads and the Abbasid dynasties. All right, so born about 570 CE to a merchant family in Mecca. He has an interesting story. He was orphaned as a child. Both of his parents were killed in a raid. As he grew up, he was taken care of by one of his uncles, but he grew up to marry a wealthy widow who was 15 years or so older than him. And so that kind of helped him get his start. And so he's working as a merchant, making some money. And he's born into a world that is very familiar with Christianity, Judaism, paganism. The Arabian Peninsula is very much a crossroads. So he has a spiritual transformation around 610 where he believes that he's visited by the archangel Gabriel. And Gabriel tells him that there's only one God, his name is Allah, and that basically it's Muhammad's job to make followers to Allah. And so he does attract followers in Mecca, which is an important city there in the Gulf. But there's going to be some issues there. Let's go back one. There is a place there, the Kaaba, where that houses 360 idols, and people come from all over the world to visit this place and pray to these idols and stuff like that. And it's kind of like a college football game. They make a lot of money off of it. People are coming, they're spending money in Mecca for housing, like hotel type stuff, on food and everything. And as Muhammad grows in power, he wants those idols destroyed. The leaders of the city aren't going to want them destroyed, and we're going to have an issue here. Now, Muhammad had written down a record of his revelations that he supposedly received during his visions, and he writes them down around 650, or they were written down about him, in 650, and that's the holy book of the Muslims called the Quran. And they call the tradition of Muhammad's life his hadith. Maybe not as important to remember as some of the other things, but you do need to know the Quran, of course, being the holy book of the Muslims. Now, here's the conflict I was talking about. His monotheistic teachings are offensive to the polytheistic pagans in the area, but more importantly is this economic threat. The religious industry makes money, and they're not willing to let go of that. Now, Muhammad himself, he has this denunciation of greed. He's saying that greed's a bad thing, and that offends the local rich people, as you can imagine. And Muhammad's going to actually have to flee Mecca for his life. Now, his followers are going to go with him to a place a couple hundred miles up the road named Medina in 622. And this Muslims call the year 0 in their calendar. Now, there in Medina, he organizes his followers into a communal society known as the Ummah. And they have this legal, spiritual code of how to act and things like that. They have trade. There's raids on Meccan caravans. They do what they got to do for the sake of their ummah, and they grow in power. Muhammad's coming back. He's coming back from his hijrah, and he's going to take Mecca. Now, Muhammad is supposedly the seal of the prophets, the final prophet. There's a lot of similarities between Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. Muslims accept the authority of Abraham and Moses, which were the two big dogs for Judaism. They accept Jesus as a prophet, just not as the Son of God. So they were held in high esteem. Hebrew scriptures such as the Torah, the Christian New Testament was also held in high esteem. They just feel like Muhammad's one step above Jesus, that he's the final prophet. Muhammad had been entrusted a more complete revelation, one that communicated Allah's plan for the world. So they certainly consider Allah this to be the same as Jesus is God, and the Christian God, and as the Jewish God. So he returns to Mecca in 630 at the head of an army. Muhammad is also a general as well as a religious leader. He is going to forcibly convert many of the people in Mecca to Islam. They destroy pagan sites. They replace them with these Muslim mosques, these Muslim churches. Now, the Kaaba is that special rock, which is a pretty cool rock, and it's preserved in honor of its importance of Mecca. So they They allow it to stay, and they approve it as a pilgrimage site. And pilgrimage will be a very important aspect of Islam. Now, here's a picture. It's a poor picture of the Kaaba. I hope that you will go and take 2 minutes to look up pictures of the Kaaba. It's a pretty cool building. The 5 pillars of Islam is what sort of like the 5 basic relationships are the foundation of Confucianism. The 5 pillars of Islam are the foundations of this religion. And the first, of course, is that there's no God but Allah. Muhammad is his prophet. You have to pray. You have to pray every day, I believe 5 times, pointing towards Mecca. You must fast during Ramadan. You should be charitable to the poor, alms for the poor, that kind of stuff. And you should, if at all possible, at some point in your life, make a pilgrimage to Mecca, something called the Hajj. And you should remember that. Here's a bunch of Muslims at prayer here, performing one of their 5 daily prayers. Jihad, another Islamic word here, means struggle. It's against vice. It's against temptations. It's also against ignorance of Islam. It can be a holy word. A holy war. It also has a second meaning, against unbelievers who threaten Islam. You're going to see some change in Islam from what it was originally to what perhaps we're used to these days. Now, Islamic law, you should know this, is called the Sharia. Codification, meaning that they're writing this Islamic law down. It's based off of the Quran and the Hadith, Muhammad's tradition, his life, basically. And it extends beyond ritual law to all areas of human activity. Conflicts today because whether or not Sharia law should trump secular law. In many parts of the Muslim world, Sharia law is the ruling law. But in America, of course, our law is the law. So we have some issues there. Caliph, another word you need to know. So Muhammad, he's going to die, and there's no clear successor to him that is identified. And so the people get together and they decide on Abu Bakr to be the new caliph, which means deputy, basically, to lead them forward, going forth. Now, not everyone agreed with this. You will get a split of Islam very early on between the Sunni and the Shiites. Now, this led Abu Bakr led war against villagers who abandoned Islam after the death of Muhammad. When Muhammad died, there were a lot of people that did. They abandoned Islam, and Bakr is going to basically come down and get vengeance on them for abandoning it. They had the Muslims had highly successful attacks on the powerful Byzantine Empire, assassinated territories of Persia. Difficulties govern the rapidly expanding territory. Islam is like a firework that just goes off. It expands so fast, so rapidly. It's incredible. And with that rapid change comes a lot of issues. As you can see here, their empire is going to be very large. Islam to 632 is here. Here's Mecca. So this is the origins of Muhammad. You're going to see there's Medina to the north. This is his early areas. By 661, you can see its growth through Egypt, through the old Persian Empire here. Islam to 733, even further out, getting closer to India. And Islam to 800, you can see how enormous this empire is, one of the largest empires in history. All right, now here's our disagreement, and it came over the selection of the caliphs. Ali, who was a son-in-law of Muhammad, was passed over for Abu Bakr, and he has his followers, and they split away when this happens. He served as caliph at 656 to 661, but then he was assassinated with most of his followers. The remaining followers organized a separate party called the Shia, or Shiites, and the traditionalists become the Sunni. The Sunni consider themselves Orthodox Muslims, and they make up about 85% of Muslims today, with the minority of the Shia or the Shiites. There are conflicts in the Middle East right now because of this religious differences. All right, here's a Shiite pilgrimage at Karbala. A lot of great architecture in the Muslim world. All right, now here's the first of our dynasties. You have to know them. The Umayyad dynasty. As you can see, they're around 100 years here. They came from the Meccan merchant class, so it's a fairly wealthy class of people. They brought stability to the Islamic community. They had their capital in Damascus, Syria, uh, which made sense for them at the time. But what you really need to know with the Umayyads is that they favor the Arab military aristocracy. Arabs are a certain group of Middle Eastern people, and aristocracy is, of course, rich landowning people. So these are Arabs who are rich and own a lot of land who are associated with the military. They favor those people over other people. That's going to cause some issues. Like I said, that favoritism causes these issues. Limited social mobility if you were a non-Arab Muslim. So it's great that you're a Muslim, but you're not going to be able to climb the social ladder in the world if you're not an Arab. It's like reserved for Arabs. There was a head tax called the jizya on non-Muslims. So you had to pay tax if you weren't a Muslim. This meant that Muslims don't really truly believe in forced conversion, I guess. Sometimes it seems like there's some loopholes around that. But this is a way to encourage people to convert because it makes monetary sense. You have to pay a higher tax if you're not a Muslim. So some people will convert to Islam just to avoid the extra money. The Umayyads were living very luxuriously. And again, that's really kind of against Muhammad's message. This made them decline in the moral authority. Traditionalist Muslims said that's not how Muhammad wanted to do it. So you guys have abandoned that. And it's going to end in their downfall. Their downfall happens when the Abbasid dynasty comes in and basically takes them out. You had Abu al-Abbas, Sunni Arab, who was allied with the Shia and non-Arab Muslims. So basically, again, you have this special little group of people that were getting special privileges, and the rest of the people are getting tired of it, and so they rise up. They seize control of Persia and Mesopotamia. They defeat an Umayyad army in 750, so essentially you have sort of a civil war here. They invite the Umayyads to a banquet to try to fix this issue, and then basically massacre them all. They kill all the Umayyads, and so the Abbasids take over. A little bit of treachery there. But they do take over. As you can see, they're going to be far longer in rule, although their last couple hundred years, they're ruling in name only. Now, how were they? Very diverse nature of administration. Again, they are not exclusively Arab. They're much more represented by there's all these different ethnicities within the massive Muslim empire, and so they are more representative. Military competent, but they don't really expand Islam further than what the Umayyads had. They're content to administer the empire that they had inherited. This empire, very important word right here, is called Dar al-Islam. So any of these areas that exist in the Muslim world are Dar al-Islam, all the way to Spain, all the way almost to India, down into Egypt. They're all part of Dar al-Islam. The growth through military activity of autonomous Islamic forces. Basically, I mean, you have some groups that are doing their own thing. Massive Persian influence in the Abbasid administration. When we see the word administration, you should think Persians. That's what they become famous for back with the Persian Empire. And Persians for hundreds and hundreds of years after the Persian Empire will be used for their administration techniques. They move the capital, this sort of important as well. They moved the capital to a brand new city called Baghdad, which is in modern day Iraq, and it's more centrally located in this massive empire of theirs, so it's better. And it's a really nice city, built with 3 concentric circles, walled circles. A lot of influence of Islamic scholars. The golden age of the Muslims is going to happen here under the Abbasids. You had the ulama, you had the qadis, which are these Muslim judges. They sought to develop policy based off of the Quran and Sharia, which is Muslim law. Here's a name you need to know, the Caliph Harun al-Rashid, high point of the Abbasid dynasty. We like to remember our high points here in AP, so remember him. Baghdad is the center of trade and commerce. Great cultural activity, a lot of literature and math and science stuff. However, we did get a civil war between the sons of Harun al-Rashid, and that's going to cause some problems. Provincial governors asserted the regional independence, so basically you're starting to see the empire crumble. The boys fighting over the throne certainly didn't help anything. And while they're doing that, while nobody's looking, you have these regional governors taking power for themselves. You had heretical movements, dissenting sects. You had all these issues. The Abbasid caliphs would eventually become the puppets of Persian noblemen. Again, it's still the Abbasid dynasty, but they're puppets. The Persians are the ones pulling the strings behind them. Later on, you got the Seljuk Turks influence, these nomadic peoples coming in out of Central Asia, and the Sultan, who was their leader, would become the real power behind the throne, even more so than the Persians. All right, what was the economy of the early Islamic world like? Well, spread of food and industrial crops. You had trade routes all the way from India to Spain. Again, it's a massive crossroads here. Western diet adapts to a wide variety. They got these new crops, which were adapted to different growing seasons. You got the development of agricultural science. You got cotton from Egypt. Paper industries developed. Major cities emerged. In this time period, it's them and the Chinese are the tops in the world. You also get the formation of a hemispheric trading zone. In this case, the Eastern Hemisphere. And what that means is that they are trading from one end to the other, from Europe to Japan, all over, and into, they make massive inroads into Africa. So, Dar al-Islam encompasses the Silk Routes, the Silk Roads, remember those. And ice is exported from Syria to Egypt in the summer. It's crazy. All right? Ice is going, the rich people are going to pay a lot of money to get ice brought to them. The camel caravans are important. They're going to cross the Sahara and begin trading massively with Central and Southern Africans. And they're going to have this huge maritime trade off the eastern coast of Africa in the Indian Ocean. They have a lot of banking and trade. The scale of their trade causes banks to develop. They introduce something that Europeans mispronounce as check. And we know what checks are, basically a slip of paper that gives you access to monetary funds anywhere you need them. The uniformity of Islamic law throughout Dar al-Islam promotes trade. We'll see this with the Mongols, of course. And joint ventures were common. You had industrialists, entrepreneurs joining together to fund, camel caravans or trading missions on ships. Al-Andalus, another term you should know, this is Islamic Spain. Most of Spain in this time period is under control of the Muslims. That part of Spain is called Al-Andalus. The Muslim Berber conquerors from North Africa took Spain early in the 8th century. They were allied to the Umayyads, but they refused to recognize the Abbasid dynasty. However, they're Muslims, and so they are part of Dar al-Islam. They formed their own caliphate, which meant that there were tensions between the Abbasids and the Al-Andalus. But again, there's a connection because of the religion. So they do have a relationship there. Change the status of women. So early on, the Quran improved the status of women. It outlawed things such as female infanticide, which was, like drowning female babies because you didn't want them because they were female. And they made that against the law. And brides, not their husbands, got to claim dowries. And so that gave some power to the women. However, male dominance is going to persevere in this. You still had your patrilineal descent. Polygamy was permitted, which is for the men, but polyandry forbidden. So the men can have multiple wives, but the wives can't have multiple husbands. The veil was adopted from the ancient Mesopotamian practice, and that's going to try to keep temptations down against women, supposedly to safeguard them. Islamic values, you had uniformity of Islamic law in Dar al-Islam, the importance of the Hajj, of the pilgrimage. The Sufis, you need to remember these guys. These are the most successful Muslim missionaries. They were successful because they weren't so black and white on the Quran. They could go into Africa and, bend a little bit. And so Africans would convert to Islam because of the Sufis, because they were willing to be flexible. This had a lot of popularity, but it did bring some tension with Orthodox Islamic theologians, people who said they're not strict enough. Al-Ghazali, major Sufi thinker from Persia, so a monk, if you will. Impossibility of an intellectual apprehension of Allah, devotion, mystical ecstasy instead. Um, Basically, this is kind of philosophy here. Impossible to truly understand Allah. All right, cultural influences on Islam. Persia has its influences, and that is administration, of course, and their governance, and Persian literature. Think Aladdin, and Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, things like that. These are Persian influences. India has some mathematics, science, and medicine, such as Hindi numbers, which is what we use in our math. Greece. Greece has an influence on the Muslims. Their philosophy, especially Aristotle, um, becomes all the rave in Muslim society, and that influences Ibn Rushd, who is a great Muslim philosopher later on. All right. Now it looks like that's it. Okay, so some main points here to think about is your big picture when you're looking at putting your summary down on your notes is Muhammad's early life, how he gets there and how he comes to power. Dar al-Islam, this community of the Muslims, if you will. Know the Umayyads, they're responsible for the rapid expansion of the Muslim empire. They're taken out because they favored the Arab military aristocracy, and so they're replaced by the Abbasids, who are more diverse, and move the capital to Baghdad. But as time goes on, they will fall under the sway of Persian rulers from behind the scenes, and eventually they will fall as well to the Seljuk Turks, who will be pulling the strings of this empire. You have Al-Andalus out there in Spain, who refuses to fall in line with the Abbasids, but they do have a relationship together. Under the Abbasids, you see a great flowering of Muslim culture. Persia giving administration, India giving math, science, and medicine, and the Greeks giving them philosophy. So it's a pretty good place to live in this time period if you're inside the Muslim empire. Thank you.